Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this first program of the Lemelson Center's Innovative Live series for 2023. Thank you for joining us today on International Women's Day for a conversation with Beverly Wood. My name is Dr. Jeffrey Brody, and I'm the Acting Director of the Smithsonian's Lemelson Center for the Study of Invention and Innovation. Our mission is to educate, engage, and empower the public to participate in technological, economic, and social change. We achieve this through our historical research and collection of archival materials, sharing our research through publications and exhibitions, our educational initiatives, such as our Spark Lab network of hands-on invention spaces, and our public programs and festivals. Our annual Innovative Lives program series is very special to us. Here we present unique opportunities for audiences to meet contemporary inventors for live conversations that demystify who inventors are, what they look like, and where invention takes place. Since our founding in 1995, the Lemelson Center has been keenly interested in the role of place and how location and physical geography interact with the community and networks of people who inhabit it to impact invention and innovation. And in 2015, our research efforts around place reached a crescendo with the opening of our Places of Invention exhibition. This exhibition takes visitors on a journey through 6 regional hotspots from across the United States to meet people who lived, worked, played, collaborated, took risks, solved problems, and sometimes failed, all in the pursuit of creating something new. We will soon be closing the Places of Invention exhibition to prepare for our new exhibition, Change Your Game, which will open to the public in March of 2024. Therefore, as the theme of this year's Innovative Live series, we are revisiting the regional hotspots featured in our exhibition, and we celebrate the current and ongoing work of inventors in these special places. One of our most beloved case studies in the exhibition features Hollywood, California in the 1930s, and the invention of Technicolor, and visitors can see the Technicolor camera used in the filming of The Wizard of Oz. Making a feature film in the golden age of Hollywood using Technicolor was a complex undertaking. To ensure that the new technology was used properly and to best effect, movie studios were required to hire specially trained Technicolor staff to oversee production. In our exhibition, you can meet Natalie Kalmus, who used her art school background and intimate knowledge of Technicolor processes to become the ultimate mediator between the director, the film lab, and what audiences saw on the silver screen. It was Natalie Kalmus who made decisions about costumes and lighting and set design to showcase Technicolor and guarantee brilliance in the final print. The need for skilled mediators able to integrate art and technology has only increased with the advent of new digital photographic technologies. And today's featured guest, Beverly Wood, is a modern-day Natalie Kalmus, an innovator in the use of color technologies for major motion pictures. She applies her knowledge of chemistry, engineering, and filmmaking to help realize the director's vision and how it appears on the screen, how you perceive it, and how it makes you feel. But just before we begin the conversation, I have a few quick housekeeping items to share for this Zoom format. We certainly invite you to use the chat box on the right side of your screen to connect with other attendees and engage with topics that are raised during the conversation. We ask that you please use the separate Q&A box to ask our panelists questions directly. Live captioning is available by clicking on the closed caption button located in the lower right corner of the presentation window. And just as a gentle reminder, this program is designed for all ages. We follow the Smithsonian Code of Conduct, which outlines civil and respectful engagement from all of us throughout this program. And finally, this program is being recorded and will be available to watch on our website at invention.si.edu. Now, I warmly welcome our colleague and moderator and often mentor, Ryan Linselman. Ryan is a curator of entertainment history in the Division of Culture and the Arts here at the Museum of American History. His research interests include American film and television, comedy, and the history of entertainment memorabilia. Ryan has curated exhibitions on children's television, Jim Henson and the Muppets, and The Wizard of Oz. and he is the project director for the museum's Culture Wing new acquisition cases. And finally, we congratulate Ryan for his curatorial work on the new Entertainment Nation exhibition. This is the museum's newest exhibition, which features a powerful and ever-changing selection of objects and interactive experiences representing entertainment culture in America over the past 150 years. So Ryan, welcome, and thank you, and please take it away.
Thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you all for joining us here today for what I think will be a fascinating conversation with someone who has called herself the movie whisperer. So we're going to try to get to the bottom of that today. As Jeffrey said, Beverly Joanna Wood is an innovator in color technologies for motion pictures. She's a recipient of the Technicolor Natalie M. and Herbert T. Kalmus Medal from the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers in recognition of her important contributions to the creation and development of color contrast enhancement and adjustable contrast enhancement motion picture processes based on her knowledge of chemistry, engineering, and filmmaking, designed in collaboration with filmmakers. Wood has provided luminary guidance to cinematographers through the transition from chemical to digital technology. She was born and raised in Chase City, Virginia. She holds degrees in chemistry from the University of Mary Washington and University of Georgia. And Beverly worked for Eastman Kodak and Metro Color Laboratories before joining Deluxe Entertainment in 1993. While at Deluxe, Beverly made significant contributions to the look and style of successful and innovative films like Seven, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?, The Man Who Wasn't There, and Angela's Ashes, just to name a few. Beverly became an associate member of the American Society of Cinematographers, ASC, in 2001, and a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences in 2009. Beverly and her husband, Brian, have returned to her farm in her hometown, and they're working on restoring the local movie theater. So welcome, Beverly.
Thank you, Ryan. It's my pleasure.
Now, we're looking forward to hearing about your life story today and some of the things that have inspired you and the contributions that you've made to the movies that we all love. I know some of those that I mentioned earlier are some of my favorite movies, so I'm really excited to dig into this with you.
Okay, me too.
So let's start at the beginning. Can you tell us about your childhood? Where did you grow up, and what was it like, where you were growing up and what you were thinking about as a child?
Well, it's really strange to be back in that same location now in retirement. We tore down our old house and built a new house, but the grounds, we put the house in the same spot. And I have my husband laughing sometimes because I said, you're standing where my mud pile was, where I used to make mud pies. And over there was where we had a hopscotch. So he's like, oh God, do I have to walk down memory lane with you? It's a little town called Chase City, halfway between Richmond, Virginia and Raleigh, North Carolina. It still has only about 2,500 people, which is what it had when I was here. And I'm fighting to help save this town, but it's a town, it's basically full of farmers. It used to be the tobacco belt. A lot of the farmers have moved on to other products. Manufacturing, of course, decimated a lot of places around the country, and this was certainly one of them. But we have a beautiful lake, and we concentrate on tourism in our county to bring people. And it's interesting, there are people from all over the United States here now. People who are moving here fast and furious, mainly because Microsoft is building very large facilities here. They have a $3 billion data center in our county seat. They're about to put one in our town and the two neighboring towns. So for that reason, all of a sudden, real estate is high and people are moving here. And I'm just hoping that the people that move here from Microsoft have spouses that have companies so that we can expand upon our town. But it was a simple life. My parents were not educated, but they were pro-educators in the sense that we worked hard when we were kids. We didn't know we were poor. I guess we were, but we were sort of middle class, I guess. But we worked hard when we were children, and our parents tried to employ upon us the importance of working hard and to getting our studies, which we did. And there was no excuse. My mother used to tell me, if you don't go to college, you're going to end up in a trailer with too many children. And I don't think that's what you want to do. Not that she was anti-children, but she knew that I was someone who always had some far-fetched idea of what I wanted to do. So it was never a concept not to go to college. My sister went to college, my brother went to college. So I went to Mary Washington. And at the time, I had always been good in math and sciences, biology, chemistry. And at the time, I thought I wanted to be a medical technologist. And Mary Washington, where I went to undergrad, had a program where there were 3 years at Mary Washington, and then your last year you spent at UVA. And I liked the concept of sort of starting out with a small school and then ending up at a major university. But when I got there after, my first year, I was like, this medical technology thing is just too limiting. And I loved my chemistry class. So I ended up majoring in chemistry and left there. And I was fortunate enough to work in R&D during the summers. I worked for Philip Morris, the tobacco company. I worked for them 2 summers. And I also worked a summer at DuPont in Wilmington, Delaware, doing the kinds of things that I hope to do one day, do kind of R&D. And I decided to go to graduate school at University of Georgia in analytical chemistry. And by the time I was writing my thesis, I knew I didn't want to just do chemistry. I wanted to do something where I could be in contact with people, interact with people. And I didn't see my life in chemistry as a mad scientist as I once had. I really wanted to apply that whole chemical way of thinking to anything I wanted to apply it to. And of course, I was a movie lover. So I said, why not go to Hollywood?
Yeah, because you stuck your toes into some big, really innovative companies at that time, right? I mean, you're talking about Kodak, even Philip Morris and certainly DuPont. There's a lot of innovation happening in those companies and
yes,
a lot going on. So you kind of took a look at the field and you said, this is something that's interesting to me, right? Now, I was going to say, when you're talking about your little small hometown, that sounds like a very far way away from Hollywood. But did you love movies growing up, though? I mean, is that what got you interested?
I love movies, and it's so interesting. I was thinking about it. We had a television that only got one station for a number of years. And then I remember my dad bought us a new TV, and we could get 3 stations. We could get NBC, ABC, and CBS, and we were overjoyed. We would go to the local theater, though, the Mecca Theater, to see movies. And Westerns were big when I grew up. So I watched a lot of Westerns on television. Most of the series were Westerns. And I loved Westerns, but I loved romantic movies. I loved kind of everything. I loved like sci-fi, but it was something about people telling a story that just was fascinating to me. And of course, when I started going to the movie theater, that was a whole nother beast to see this larger than life, image on the screen and the sound. For me, it was escapism. I could go somewhere else because I was in a, from my point of view as a kid, I was in a little hick town and I wanted to see more of the world.
So paint a picture for us of what that was like. I mean, was this a single screen theater, like a storefront kind of a place? Did you go with your friends, family?
Actually, the theater is pretty big with 600 seats.
Oh, wow.
400 on the ground floor and 200 in the balcony. And, I told you guys, I'm about to turn 67. So I'm from the era of integration segregation. So my movie theater was segregated. So I went to the balcony, and that's where I saw, I don't think I've ever seen a movie on the ground floor. By the time it integrated, I had moved on and gone off to school. But all the movies I saw were from that balcony. And, it didn't change my viewpoint, really. The balcony is the best place to sit, in my opinion. It didn't change my dreams, and that's all that's important. So it's a beautiful theater. That's one of the reasons I want to restore it. It's a beautiful theater right in the middle of Main Street in my town.
Now, were you the kind of person who had your eyes glued to the screen, or were you looking back behind you in that projection booth trying to figure out what was going on?
It's interesting. At the time, I didn't even think about behind the camera, so to speak. It was all about creating this world. It's not that I sat looking at the theater saying I want to be an actress or I want to be a director. It was just something about it that I know I wanted to be close to. The whole concept of doing something in the film business came much later.
So you were never somebody who wanted to be a projectionist or get behind and see?
No.
Now, when you were growing up, did you have any role models? I know you said your parents were really pro-education and they had no thought about, of course, you were going to go to college and of course you were going to pursue the career. You know, were there people also along the way? Because I assume, you know, as a young woman of color, there weren't a lot of people who were, you know, on that sort of one-minded track towards chemistry and engineering at that time. I mean, can you talk about what or some of the challenges you faced, or, you know, did you find other folks that, you know, understood you?
It's interesting because first and foremost, my parents were my role models. My parents were both very, very smart. And they had done so much even without an education. So I had so much respect for them, but they were really good people. And they preached from that point of view, is no matter what you do, you have to be a good person. You have to treat people well. And my parents didn't mix any bones about being Black. That's no excuse. There are going to be people who are not going to like you, going to call you names. And you can't let that stop you, because every time somebody calls you a name, if you let it affect you, you'll never get anywhere. So in the privacy of our home, we talked about racism. We talked about treating people fairly, no matter who they were, but it didn't make me fearful when I went out into the world. It was really odd to me. I never could understand why people didn't like people just because of the way they looked, but that was another story. I think my teachers in school were the people who were so powerful in helping me, who recognized in me that I wanted to go a little further than most of my classmates. I'm almost 5'11", and I was 5 feet tall when I was in the first grade. And I've always been a healthy little girl. And at 5 feet tall, I remember they used to come and get me out of the first grade and have me go teach the second and third grade when a teacher had to go home sick.
Wow.
Some of that was because of my size, but it was because of my personality. I was a know-it-all. By the time I got to the first grade, I knew everything. I was teaching the other kids stuff. So I've always kind of felt not like a kid. I always felt that there was something I needed to do to help people, which, you know, sometimes gets old, but I had this feeling that I could help people and I could help, you know, my fellow students or the kids above me or whatever. And my teachers were the people who inspired me. I mean, I probably, you know, in my grammar school, they were all my teachers were Black teachers, and I was just in awe of them because some were good, some weren't so good, but they all had great stories about what they had gone through to get an education and become a teacher. And I think in that respect, I was inspired because some of the stories they told me, I was like, if they can do that, I can do anything. So I think that's what, if anything, were the few people who inspired me out there. And of course, people I read, you know, I read all the time. I just thought it was interesting to read and find out what somebody's life, you know, when I've never told anybody this, when I was a kid, to think like the movies, in the sense that I'm like, why do I only see my story, what I'm doing? Why can't I switch something and see what my mom's doing? My husband told me later, that's remote viewing. Don't even get into that. But the whole concept of, in a way, my brain was a camera and I was seeing what I was doing. And I used to, as a little kid, I used to wonder, how come I can't see what other people are doing at the same time? And I think that kind of made me a voyeur in a sense, but I was always curious about other people's experiences and how it affected them as they got older.
It sounds like it's really interesting that some of those things are innate, right? Your confidence and your ambition, but some of it builds on the other people around you, encouraging you and giving you those opportunities, even if it's just when you're in first grade and they're asking you to teach the second grade class.
It's everything. It's the one thing about education today that blows my mind, because kids are so fragile. And if they don't have strong parents inciting them to do better, and they don't have teachers with the ability or the time or the money to help them, then, you know, it's really kind of sad.
And then, so, you know, I'm just thinking about you because you're so undaunted. It sounds like you're going to Mary Washington, which was a women's school up until around the time you went, probably, right? And I'm sure
we had some guys there, yeah.
And, you know, so you're kind of breaking down barriers when you get there and opening up this field. But then, you know, when you go out on your own, I mean, where did you end up working in some of your first jobs when you got out of school then?
Well, when I left graduate school, I went straight to Kodak. I started big, but I went to Kodak because it was huge in Rochester. There were 100,000 people, basically. I remember weren't that many. I think there were 65,000 in Rochester. And the program that they offered me was what they called business and technical training. And basically what it was your first year at the company, you would get to work in 4 different divisions and do 4 different types of jobs, which I felt fascinating because here I was trying to figure out how I was going to use the chemistry. And all I had known was research. So they offered me that job and I said, I'm going to go there because I will be able to kind of figure out what I want to do without having to jump companies. And it was perfect. My first stint was in R&D, which was what I did, gas chromatography, which is what I had done in research in graduate school. And then I went on to do some computer modeling for Billy Rubin. We don't want to go there. I moved to a job where I was teaching sales reps how to troubleshoot the new blood analyzer that Kodak was trying to get off the ground. I had to teach them biochemistry, which was really interesting. And then I had a stint where I was just looking at writing documents for people who don't understand chemistry. And I also did a black and white rotation where I took black and white silver halide images and toned them and showed how at the silver halide level, the toning changed the shape and the way the silver halide grain reflected light. And when I was done, I had an offer from all those divisions and I said, well, what else you got?
I was just going to say how incredible that is for somebody like in their mid-20s to have that opportunity to have 4 offers out in front of them, but you wanted more.
And have the gall to say, what else you got? Well, I'm glad I did because a guy had seen me do a presentation with the black and white silver halide images and he called me and he said, we don't put people in very often, but we're looking for somebody in the motion picture division. And I was sitting there on the phone going, oh my God. And I said, I'd love to hear more about it. And here I am.
Now, at that time, Kodak would have been one of the major suppliers of all major feature motion pictures, right? I mean, that was...
Oh, yeah. They were right up until the end. Yeah, they were. Absolutely.
So, and you knew that at that time because you'd been doing some research on it. So you just being a movie fan, thinking about that being your career, what was it on your mind? Like, what did you think that opportunity might open as a door for you to be able to work with?
I didn't think about it that way. I thought about it from the standpoint of, let me see how I can get as much as I can out of this job, not for what they think I'm going to need, but what I want to get. And that's how I've always looked at things. It's not so much you tell me what you want me to do. You tell me what you want me to do, but then I'm going to add a lot because I want to know it backwards and forwards. And it was interesting because, it was an area that not many women went into at Kodak, the sales and engineering rep. That was what I was going to be. And they didn't have a class to put me with to train that year because I was the only one they added to their roster. So they put me in an international group. And boy, was that a trip, because you got to remember, I went from an all-girls school basically to the University of Georgia, where all the guys in my research group, there were 14 of them, they were all guys. There wasn't a woman in there. And then now I'm at Kodak, and now I'm going to go with like 13 international guys. It was interesting because a couple of the guys had difficulty understanding that I was going to end up with the same job they were going to end up with. They kept saying, well, what job are you going to get? Because I was a woman. And I realized it had to do with, the differences in the cultures and things like that. But it prepared me for that ultimate feeling of being surrounded by people where they look at you as a woman going, what the hell are you doing here? It was a great experience. I learned a lot. Some of those guys who had difficulty with me, we're still friends on Facebook. So, it wasn't that it was a bad situation. It was just what people were used to. And it was great for me because they came to me one day and they said, we have a territory that just opened up and we're wondering if you'd go to San Francisco. And I was like, give me my ticket.
I'm just struck by how fearless you were, not only being, the only woman in a room sometime with all these men who are asking you, like you said, what job are you really trying for here, that sort of thing. But then you're ready to move to the big city and just jump right into this. And yeah.
Why not? San Francisco is a great city. I happened at the time to have family in San Jose. Unfortunately, my sister, who was only 31 years old, lived there with her husband and 2 children, and she was battling cancer. And he ended up dying 6 months after I got there. But I look at it in a very positive way. If I had not gotten that territory, I wouldn't have been able to spend those 6 months with her. And I remember the sales manager at Kodak called me after she died. He goes, "Why didn't you tell me you had a sister out there? I would have made sure you went to that territory." And I said, my sister wouldn't let me. She wanted me to go where I was going to go. So it was a mixed blessing in a way. It was a tough territory in the sense of, moving to a major city like that and getting to know all your clients. And again, them looking at you going, are girls going to get here and get her hands dirty and do all this stuff? Or what knowledge could you possibly have? To my sister passing, and then me going back and saying, okay, now I've got time that I've got to put in to understand what the client wants. Start meeting directors of photography, within the laboratories, which were the places that I was calling on. You had several people that you had to deal with. You had the chemical mixers, you had the chemists, all the people who, when you're troubleshooting a problem, you have to go to and try to figure out what's happening. Just for people who may not understand, as a Kodak sales engineering rep, what that really means is if there's a problem on a movie, you had to go and figure out where the problem was. Was it chemical? Was it in the camera? Was it from the manufacturer? And of course, everybody was saying, it's not my problem, it's their problem. So I learned quickly how to be a diplomat and smile, and say, come on, guys, we got to look at this. And I have to say that I had a group of some of the best clients in the world who realized that even though I didn't know everything, I was willing to say, I don't know, but I'll find out somebody who can, and I will be here with you until dark and after, if you need me, and we'll figure this out. And that was something valuable that a guy named Joel Simmelmeyer told me. He's passed away, but he was the guy that I worked with in San Francisco. And he said, your clients don't want to be fooled. They'll figure you out if you're full of crap, so to speak, and just do what you say you're going to do. And he was right.
I was just going to say, reading a little bit about your career, it seemed like your career really snowballed so quickly. You started out with this job, and then you were kind of this behind the scenes magician working with these filmmakers and cinematographers to create, to translate their vision that they had in their head or that they were thinking about into something that maybe had never been done before on film or is increasingly on digital. And I think, maybe you're talking about some of those skills. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you face some of these challenges. But to me, it seems like you were just carried that dauntless spirit in, and that knowledge of chemistry and the mastery and the ability to tackle those challenges in a way that you became to them like this, the magician behind the screen here, the man behind the curtain who's pulling the levers and making something happen.
Well, you're right. But let me just say one thing. When I started at Deluxe, one of the things I realized from all the reading that I've done is that for so many filmmakers, the laboratory was a facility that had a curtain, and they didn't know what went on behind the curtain. So I imagine, in a certain sense, the movie was like a child to them. They're bringing you their child, and they're saying, take care of it, make it grow, and then we're going to present it to the world. And yet there's this curtain up, and they don't even know what's going on in there, if you're telling them the truth or whatever. So, I got with the president and I said, we got to change the way we're seen. We've got to show them what goes on behind the curtain and guide them and reassure them that we're going to take care of them. And that was easy to do because, of course, I had been at that facility. I was at Deluxe for probably 2.5 years because, my boss, Cyril Dobrinsky, when he hired me, the laboratory had just been purchased by Rank out of London. So Fox had been the former owner. So Rank wanted to bring the lab up to some new standards. So we literally had to tear the place apart and come to grips with all the things we needed to do in order to make it operate as a well-greased facility. In those days, Technicolor was, head and shoulders above us in their ability to woo a client and do a massive release. And that's the thing that Cyril said, Bev, with your help and a bunch of other people, we've got to change the face of deluxe. So when we got to the point where we started, Cyril wanted me to woo some clients, so to speak. We agreed it was going to be on a technical note. We weren't going to try to buy them, send them wine or that kind of crap. We wanted them to have faith that we were going to take care of their project. And once you opened that door and they realized that's what you wanted to do, you had them. Because with as much as filmmakers have to worry about, they don't need to worry about the lab. They need to know that whatever happens to their movie behind that curtain is going to make it look better and make it easier for them to have that release come out and be proud of it. So my job was easy. You know where all the bones were buried, man? I was excited. I was excited about the opportunity to sit next to some of these filmmakers and cinematographers in the screening room and hear their thoughts on why they did what they did and ask me questions to help them understand what they had to do or what I had to do and what we had to do together to make it right. I mean, it was a wonderful feeling. And it really wasn't egotistical. It was about being a participant in the process and making a difference.
Maybe you can talk us through some of the techniques and technologies and things you're using, because I think as much as even for filmmakers, it's all behind the curtain. Certainly for us as film viewers, we don't know what happens between somebody, cranking the camera back in the old days and us seeing it in the theater. So what are some of the effects that a filmmaker might want, or what would they come to you with a problem about, and how would you solve that?
Well, most of the time, the films that I would work on were with well-established cinematographers who knew exactly what they were doing. And they had come up with a concept. Usually they come in with a picture, a book. This is the image that I've discussed with the director. I'm thinking about trying to see if we can come to some point of view. How do we get there? And we would start talking about it. It's so interesting talking about film again, because most people who are young have no concept. I mean, a roll of film comes off a camera and it's in the everything's in the dark in the camera, and it comes off and it's in a reel and it goes to a laboratory, and in the dark, they make that roll up and put it through a series of water baths in order to develop it. And then it comes out an end where there's a dry box, and then you have a roll of film with your images on it. You talk about that now, and it seems like something from the dark ages. It also makes you wonder, how is film so robust that it didn't get scratched and dug and things like that? And that's a testament to the film manufacturers. But most of the time with the process with the cinematographer, they would, talk about it. We look at maybe the photographs together, and we talk about it. If there were any extenuating circumstances about where they were going to be shooting or anything. And once you figured out which stocks they like to use, then they would arrange to shoot a test. Some people would shoot a test, that was equivalent to a whole movie. And some people would shoot just a little bit of a test, but it didn't matter to me. I was trying to figure out what they wanted. And then we would get in a room and look at the test and talk about where we go from there. With something like Seven, it was easy because Darius Kanji and David Fincher knew silver retention so well. Darius, of course, had done many films in silver retention in Europe. And when I first met them, I was going to a meeting. One of my cohorts had set up this meeting and hadn't even figured out who was coming, which was a pet peeve of mine. But they would throw me in a room because they figured I read the trades all the time. Whoever comes, Bev will know him. And I knew they were getting ready to do a movie at New Line, and they said the creatives are coming. I was like, okay. So I'm standing around waiting, and I sit down, and in walks David Fincher and Darius Kanji. And I said, oh my God, David Fincher and Darius Kanji. And of course, they're looking at me going, how the hell do you know who we are? And I just said, well, David, I met you in San Francisco when you were at Boyington Films. And I remember when you did that smoking baby in the womb. I don't know if you've ever seen that commercial, but he had a baby smoking a cigarette in the womb, and you only realized that the camera pulled back. David did that at a very young age. And I remember when I met him, I said, this young man is going to go far. And of course, Darius had done Babette's Feast. He had done so many beautiful movies. So they're looking at me going, my God, there's somebody in the lab who knows who we are and is paying attention to us. So I think in some respects, they were happy. And then I looked at him, I said, do you guys want to do silver retention? And they were like, you know what that is? I said, yes, I've done it before at Color. And they were like, you're kidding. I'm like, no. He said, well, everybody told us that Deluxe didn't do silver retention. I said, that was in the past. So basically, Darius and David and I started doing tests. And what they wanted was a very dramatic, very desaturated look. And I got with our head of engineering, and we started talking about some stuff that he had done on the first Blade Runner and the stuff that I had done at Metrocolor. And we came up with a way to give them what they wanted. And we did. And they looked at dailies and said, oh my God, this is beautiful. Let's go. And we had never, at Deluxe, had never done dailies, by the way, is every day when the film comes in, every night when the film comes in, you'd have to make a print and get it ready to show the filmmakers the next day. Those are dailies. So that meant we were going to have to do this special process every day for I think it was close to 3 months. And our head of production was like, no, you're not taking a machine offline to do that. I lose production. And I'm like, yes, I am. Yes, I am, because I made a commitment to these people, and the president backed me up, and thus began doing 7. And I have to say that for 3 months, I was at the lab probably 12 to 13 hours every day to get it done. But it was worth it, because when we finished that movie, the phone just wouldn't stop ringing. Everybody wanted something special. Everybody said, we didn't know Deluxe would do special stuff. Would we do cross-processing, which is when you take reversal film and put it through the ECN, which is the normal color negative material that you process for a movie. It's called ECN process. If you take reversal film and put it through the ECN process, you get what's called cross-processing. And in the past, Deluxe wouldn't do it because they were afraid of contamination. And I'm like, it's a small amount compared to the millions of feet of film that we're running. It's not a problem. So we started doing cross-processing. We started setting up screenings. I set up screenings to show people tests on silver retention. You probably read that article in American Cinematographer called Soup du Jour, where they interviewed everybody at all the labs and talked about the process. And it was a hot time for silver retention. And then other projects started coming in, and I was kind of pulled from being the head of quality control and chemical and all that, and put in a position to be in a job where I had my own group, basically in the sense that I was sort of straddling the fence between production and engineering. And the president told me, I want you to take care of our high profile clients, and whatever they need to do, we'll sit and talk and figure out if we can do it. And I was like, this is going to be great, because it was like having a think tank, no matter
the A-team, you're the special forces here.
Yeah, exactly. Come on, we can do it. It was hard, I was getting old fast, but it was fantastic.
This is the time too that there's a lot of changes happening in the industry, right? I mean, even just the changeover in the late 90s, early 2000s from the traditional celluloid film stock to digital and digital processing, right? I mean, you're right in the middle of all that. So can you talk?
But that didn't happen. That didn't happen for a while, because I know I had 10 years. I joined Deluxe in 93, and I know I had at least 10 years before digital really reared its head. Because it was then I started working at eFilm, because we had bought it. And we realized that we were going to have to bridge the gap for the cinematographer The same relationship we had in film, we could have in digital too. They didn't need to worry about it, but you have to remember, they didn't know the DI process. They didn't know the digital breakdown because there were still people shooting in film. Mm-hmm. But there was the whole concept of what's called the digital intermediate that really started switching everything over to digital. That happened first before digital capture.
Yeah, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because I think Oh Brother, Where Art Thou was one of those projects, right? Some of the work you did with the Coen brothers.
Yeah, it's interesting. I did not work on the digital intermediate for Oh Brother. That was done at Kodak's facility.
Okay.
Cinesite, it was called. But I had already done several projects with the Coens and Roger. And because I had eFilm under my belt, I was already learning the whole DI process. And Roger would call and say, something's not right here. And we would talk about, I would tell him, yeah, something's not right. And we'd talk about it. But it was when it was time to release the movie that he brought the negative in. And he said, I don't know how I'm going to color time this movie. And I'm not trying to throw rocks or anything at Cinesite, but basically there were some things that they hadn't quite gotten right, such that one part of the film had one aim for density and the other part of the reel had another aim, so that if you printed it, you're supposed to be able to print a digital intermediate at one light and have everything look bright. Well, that didn't happen. So Roger's like, what the hell am I going to do? And I said, we're going to color time it as if it was cut negative. We're going to slug it and cut it as if it's cut negative. And that's what we did for Oh Brother. So it was that experience with him that made me not ask him to do a digital intermediate at eFilm until he was ready, because I realized his first experience was not the best. He was still shooting film. And then he came along one day and said, I think I'm going to do a DI on this film, Intolerable Cruelty. And then we were on our way. But the first DI that I worked on was actually with Dean Simler, because he had done several movies at the lab and he was about to do We Were Soldiers. And they had already done a quote unquote negative answer print at the lab. And the studio wanted to transition this creative group and also transition their internal people to see what it was like. So we went to eFilm and actually did a digital intermediate on the film also. And with Dean, he saw the power of what was happening and he was on board. And it was a process that we kind of all learned together in a sense. There were great people at eFilm, because eFilm was its own entity. These people, we didn't recreate it, we bought it. That's how we were able to get such a great digital facility. And it was a really great time. It wasn't until later when people started talking about shooting digital that it became the beginning of the end for film. But it was an incredible process to go through to sort, because people will say, what do you know about digital? And I said, what I don't know about digital, I can learn, but I know about images, and I have the same images, sort of image bibliography in my brain as most other people. And as long as you know what you think it's supposed to look like in film, you have a way of getting there with digital. Now, I realize with the digital image, you can surpass film in a lot of ways, but the fact that you start with an aim of trying to look as good as film is what got everybody through the process.
Well, I think this is a great place to turn over to questions and answers now, because we're having some questions coming in the chat here. So if you don't mind, I can move on to those and see what folks in the chat are asking about. One of the questions we got was, in what ways did you need to adapt or change the technology you were working with, or invent new technologies to achieve your vision?
Well, I think the biggest thing that I had to do was work with the engineering staff at Deluxe when we had to convert machines. When you think about it, we had to have the ability to switch from a normal processing machine to a special silver retention processing machine within a couple of hours. Because if you're trying to put out 10,000 prints of something, you don't want to hear about a machine being offline because it took so long to transition between the two. So that was the thing. It was not so much the the characteristics of the image, we were able to get there, but how do you do it in a production environment? And we did all sorts of things, spray nozzles, push buttons. We did all sorts of things and ended up using a lot of those things in the technology in order to, bring the image. Because, we had processing machines running, 700-800 feet a minute. So you had to do this at a very high rate. And that was the thing that was most challenging. The chemistry itself wasn't really challenging because you're moving at such a rapid rate. You wouldn't have to worry about things like agitation because, with film development, you certainly need agitation. But at the speed we were going, we didn't have to worry about agitation. We didn't have to worry about byproducts because we had a vast mother tank because we had 10 machines that were all overflowing back into the tank so that we didn't really have a problem with any kind of contamination or anything like that. It was really about trying to make the first frame of a picture look like the last frame of a picture. And that had to do with being able to offer consistency and the ability to be production oriented.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's another interesting question that we got. Will AI ever replace you in the work you do?
The work I did, the work that I did in film and then the transition to DI, I think those days are gone. It's sad in a way. It's one of the reasons I retired. The need for someone like me isn't as big as it used to be because in those days, everything happened in the lab. The DP would come in at 4 and take a look at his dailies before anybody else saw them. And if you had to reprint them, you reprinted them for him to make sure everything looked good for his screening. It was the director and the DP who made all the decisions. Now, when you make films, it's everybody has 2 cents to put in. And it's interesting. I don't know if I like it. It's got, of course, if you are high-powered enough creative to have final say, that's wonderful, but there are not that many people left who have that ability. But I think someone like me, AI, maybe, but I don't know how many movies the AI character has seen.
That's a good point, right? Maybe they're, playing movies to a computer, I guess, right now, so they can learn it.
Yeah.
Well, here's another, because we were talking about film. I am interested in this question. Does anything in digital look as good as 70 millimeter film?
That's a tough one. I happen to believe no, but you got to look at it. The type of digital images that they're making now are so different than what they used to make on film. I mean, in my opinion, nothing on 70 millimeter looks as good as black and white 35. If I had my druthers, I would make everybody shoot in 35 and then colorize. Because there's nothing like the quality of the image in black and white. But to answer your question, no, 70 millimeter is gorgeous.
Well, we've got some other questions here about the challenges you faced and how you overcame them. Another one here that's asking about, did you ever struggle with doubt or imposter syndrome when you were applying for jobs, like when you're working at Kodak or Deluxe, and how you worked through that? So maybe we can kind of group those together, see what you think about that.
I don't know that I ever really had fear when I went in to interview something, but I never knew how people would take me. People call me brash. People call me know-it-all. I remember one guy didn't hire me for a job in New York in Kodak because he told people that I was too brash. I was too self-assured, which in my mind thought, wouldn't you have to be self-assured in New York? But later, about 10 years later, he came up to me at a cocktail party and apologized. He said, I was wrong. He said, you are as good as you say you were, and it would have been great for you to be in New York. And I told him, I said, you didn't have to say that to me. I said, you're an extraordinary man to say that, and thank you. My confidence was sometimes jilted by people because people say the weirdest things to you. Like, what do you do around here? All I see you do is walk around with a pencil and, one woman said she worked on the floor. She was a processing person, and she said, "I want your job." So I said, "Why do you want my job?" Because you walk around and you tell people what to do. And I realized then where I was headed, and I said, "Well, I just asked her, do you think I just have this job because I'm a Black female?" And she said, "Uh-huh." And I said, "Well, okay." And I said, "Well, it's not true." And then I went on to explain how much college I had and my experience and what I was doing when I was walking around, what to do. And she looked at me and she said, "I'm sorry." I said, "It's okay." I said, "Now you know." But it was that kind of thing, the unknown of what people are thinking sometimes, that used to bother me. And then I reached a point, I was like, I can't worry about what people think about me. I tried to make people understand that there was a time when people got jobs based just on their color. But I said, not a job like this. I said, I told a girl, were they paying me this much money? So, it was never, I was never frightened. I would cry sometimes. I never let them see me cry. I was frustrated because I could feel that if I had been a man, it would have been easier to get something done. But I would go in the ladies' room and cry and then wipe my eyes and say, "Okay, you got to go out here and figure another angle." And most of the time I ended up just, leveling with these men. I remember in the basement of Deluxe once, there were a bunch of plumbers and electricians, and I realized they were fearful. With me being down there, kind of being in the middle of what they were doing, they were fearful of what I could say or might affect their job. And these guys were all union, but it still didn't matter. And I just called a meeting one day and I said, "Guys, what's wrong?" And they said, "Well, you're always down here making changes and blah, 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 blah." And once I heard that, I said, "Look, I'll make a deal with you. I will teach you everything you need to know about chemistry." I said, "Because you guys don't know anything about the chemistry of your job, and you need to understand it." Because the guy says, "Well, they're putting in slicks that will troubleshoot everything." I said, "No, a slick is not going to troubleshoot a problem. You're going to have to troubleshoot a problem, and you can do a better job if you really understand what's happening. So I'll teach you everything you need to know about chemistry and what's going on upstairs. And you teach me everything about what you know about plumbing and electrical so we can solve some problems down here." And I never forget this guy named Carl. He was close to retirement. Nobody said a word. And he stood up and he said, "Bev, I'm with you." And everybody else said, "Okay, Bev, we'll help." And I still get chills because, those guys were the heart and soul of Deluxe. And they were the people that helped us transition from being an okay lab to where we surpassed Technicolor.
Wow. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left and we got a lot of questions that people are asking. So let's see if we can do some rapid fire just because we got a lot of folks who are interested in things. Here's a good one. Somebody's asking about, since they've only grown up with digital imaging, they have a simple question. How large were the machines that you talked about for like the silver retention process and the labs? Can you give a sense of the scale and size of those places?
The processing machines ran between 2 floors and held about 10,000 gallons just in the developer. They were huge. They're about the size of those big storage bins you see people have that go on trains. They're about the size of that.
Wow. Somebody else asked, if you were leaving grad school today because that kind of large scale film process is gone, what would you be interested in going into now?
I think I would have gone back to my first love. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a forensic chemist.
Oh, cool. Another question here is, do you have a favorite movie that you worked on or a favorite movie overall?
Yeah, Jesse James and No Coward, The Coward, No Coward. That was my favorite. That was an extraordinary film, and it was wonderful because it was silver retention and digital intermediate all together. It was everything. It was fantastic. And it was Roger. It was beautiful.
And you're getting back to those Westerns you grew up watching too.
I know. and shall we mention Brad Pitt? That's not bad. Look, 2.5 hours.
We got some questions about how you're inspired. Where do your ideas come from? Are they in dreams, or what inspires or stimulates your creativity?
Nature. A I've always, even in Los Angeles, I used to walk a lot and look around and look at images of, what stuff really looks like. And sometimes I would think about, how would you get that on the screen? So I think nature was probably the biggest influencer of what I did. And, I go to museums a lot, but I always felt that nature was my best teacher.
I love that idea that you talked about when somebody bring you a book, like with a photo of maybe something from nature, right? Or maybe a piece of art. Because we've got some questions about, what did working on films teach you about collaboration and the creative process? And I think it gets to that, right? It's you getting to see what they have in their mind and then thinking about how do I make that happen chemically, digitally, whatever it might be. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, because, they show you an image, but you look at it and you got to think, now I got to translate this to film, or I got to translate it to digital, and there's going to be different textures. And that's just kind of the first dart on the board, because once you get there, they're going to want to tweak it. They may want to tweak the lower contrast. How does the faces look? How do the highlights look? They might want to be a brighter highlight, and then you get to the blacks at the top of the curve. They might want their blacks to be black, but you want to be able to read into them. So when you get to the center of the circle from your first point, you got to have some leeway. You can't come up with something that's going to, first of all, you can't come up with something that's going to cost the studio a fortune to be able to do. You always have to keep that in balance. But you also, what I just said, it has to be something that you can get to and have some leeway. It's not like getting to one little point, because you'll never reach that on all those prints. So, it was really about getting enough to get started, because once the two of you are looking at the same image on the screen, then you can tweak it and get where you need to be. And sometimes I have to tell them, you can't get there from here. Mm-hmm. That was rare.
We've got another question here that's interesting about mentorship. Who were your important mentors, and where can young people find mentors today?
My mentor was a man named Bud Stone, who was the president of Deluxe. He introduced me to the ASC. And then when he retired, Cyril Dobrinsky, our new president, and I just have to say, Cyril was the greatest boss I ever had, because he always told me in front of everybody else, I seek your opinion. I want to hear what you think. I was never made to think that I was a Black female and a bunch of men. It was like, your opinion I want to hear. He and I are still friends. He calls me every couple of weeks. He's a good guy. And I used to tell people, if you go to work somewhere and you got a bad boss, go get a new one. But young kids today are concerned, I think, look in your environment. I mean, there's some great teachers that if you really talk to them, you might find that they're inspiring people. I don't think you got to look for somebody on television or look for somebody far away that you won't be able to be in contact with. Just look in your environment, look in your town. I mean, there are great businessmen that have great stories who've taught themselves how to do what they do. And that ability to be independent, I think, is one of the greatest attributes you can have as a person these days.
Well, I think we'll end on one question I find very interesting here. How is color most used in your personal life today? What does color mean to you now?
Oh, let me tell you, I have always been a person who can decorate stuff. And in fact, I'm just finishing the transformation of a little house I bought here in Virginia that is mid-century modern. And I am decorating it because I'm going to rent it furnished. And the colors that I'm using, I have a bird egg blue refrigerator, and it is gorgeous in the house. It's a retro piece. And people come in and go, oh my God, the colors are amazing. So I've always been a person who can decorate, and I've always been a person who can remember a color, because it turns out the refrigerator and my color cabinets in the kitchen are the exact same color, which I wanted them to be, but I never matched them. So I'm still having fun from that point of view. And
still got it.
I'm trying to come up with some really interesting things to do in the theater with colors. So I'm good.
That's wonderful. Well, I'm sorry that we didn't get to all the great questions that we had in the chat here, but thank you so much, Beverly, not only for the rapid fire questions here at the end, but for all the knowledge and expertise and stories about your life that you shared with us today. I think it was really fascinating to hear about your journey, and man, you are undaunted. I want to take some of that inspiration from you too.
All right, thank you. And to get the Natalie Kalmus Award was really the highlight of my career. I have always thought about her and thought it's hard for you, but what the heck? It must have been for her. In that era, having to listen to a woman saying, no, you shot black and white that way. You got to shoot color this way. So if I could go back in time, she's one person I'd want to have a cup of tea with.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we're going to bring the program to a close here. Thank you again, Beverly, and thanks everyone else for joining us.
Thank you.
You can join the Lemelson Center again on Wednesday, April 12th for Innovative Lives with Amy Prieto and Sunil Cherian. Dr. Amy Lucia Prieto is a professor in the Department of Chemistry at Colorado State University, founder and CTO of Prieto Battery Incorporated. Sunil Cherian is founder and CEO for Spire, an innovative technology company that develops solutions for integrating renewable and distributed energy resources with microgrids and power systems. And both speakers are featured in the Fort Collins case studies for the Lemelson Center's Places of Invention exhibition. Please visit Places of Invention at the National Museum of American History through the fall of this year. And with that, we'll bring this program to a close. Thank you all for joining us, and hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Beverly. Bye.
Bye.